The problem, Desmond Fossey decided as he stood in front of his wardrobe in nothing but an old pair of shorts, was not that he was the alpha of the Blackwood pack. The problem was not that he had 160 wolves who depended on him for leadership, stability, and the occasional strongly worded letter to the county planning office about zoning violations. The problem was that he owned, according to the last count Marcus had conducted with the pained precision of a man cataloguing war crimes, 37 shirts, and he could not find a single one. His wolf, a creature of operatic enthusiasm and zero practical skills, thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened. "She has taken them all," Apex projected, his internal voice rattling around Desmond's skull like a happy drunk in an empty ballroom. "Every last one. This is devotion. This is dedication. We should be honored. I should be dressed," Desmond muttered, staring at a row of empty hangars that looked like the skeletal remains of a once thriving civilization. "I have a meeting with the Pack Council in 40 minutes. Attend shirtless," Apex continued. "They will respect the competence. They will call a vote of no confidence." "Same word," his wolf replied. "Different energy." Desmond closed the wardrobe door, opened it again, as if the shirts might have been hiding, and accepted his fate. Somewhere in this house, his mate had built a nest out of his entire identity, and he was going to have to do something about it. The thing was, it hadn't started like this. 6 weeks ago, it was a shirt. One shirt. His old grey Henley, the one with the frayed cuffs that he wore on Sundays when the pack house was quiet and there was nothing to do but read by the fire and let Bee lean against his shoulder. He looked for it, couldn't find it, and assumed it had been eaten by the dryer. The dryer in the Blackwood pack house was a malevolent appliance that had been devouring socks since 2014 and had recently graduated to larger prey. Then it was the flannel, the dark green one that smelled like pine sap because he'd worn it to chop wood the previous weekend. Then the cable knit sweater his mother had made him, the one with a slightly lopsided collar that he loved, precisely because it was lopsided. Then his work jacket, his spare hoodie, 2 more flannels, a thermal, and his good Henley, the one without the frayed cuffs, the one he wore when he wanted to look like he hadn't just rolled out of the woods, which, to be fair, he usually had. Marcus Thorne, his beta, had started tracking the disappearances on a spreadsheet. "We're averaging 2.3 garments per week," Marcus had reported yesterday, standing in Desmond's office with the quiet gravity of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "At this rate, you'll be functionally shirtless by mid-October." "Thank you, Marcus. I've taken the liberty of ordering replacements. 3 Henleys, 2 flannels, 1 thermal. They should arrive Thursday. She'll take those, too." Marcus had paused, his pen hovering over his tipboard. "Then we have a systemic problem, sir." They did, and Desmond knew it. He'd known it for weeks, in the way you know something is wrong when you can't quite look at it directly. The way you know the roof is leaking because the ceiling is sagging, but you keep putting a bucket under it instead of climbing up to fix the hole. His Omega mate, the quiet, careful, heartbreakingly lovely Beatrice, was stealing his clothes. And he didn't know how to talk to her about it without breaking something fragile. He pulled on the only shirt he could find, an ancient paint-stained undershirt from the back of a drawer that had survived only because it smelled more like turpentine than like him, and headed downstairs. The Blackwood pack house was a rambling Victorian on 12 acres of forest land, the kind of house that had been added to so many times over the decades that the floor plan made sense only if you'd grown up in it, and sometimes not even then. It smelled like coffee, pine, old wood, and the particular warm musk of a dozen wolves who considered this place home. Someone had left boots in the hallway again. Someone else had left a half-eaten sandwich on the banister. The kitchen radio was playing something country, and through the back window, Desmond could see 2 of the younger wolves, Nate and Ellis, chasing each other across the back field in wolf form, their fur catching the early morning light. It was home. It had been home for 5 generations of Fosses, and Desmond loved it with the uncomplicated, bone-deep love of someone who had never had to earn a place in the world. It had simply been given to him along with the title, the responsibility, and the weight of every expectation his father had ever laid on his shoulders. That was a thought he didn't need right now. He pushed it away in the kitchen He found his sister, Rowan, who was technically the pack's head of operations and practically the only reason the house hadn't burned down. She was sitting at the massive oak table with a mug of coffee, her dark hair piled on top of her head in a knot held together by what appeared to be a pencil and sheer willpower. She had the look of someone who'd already made 4 decisions before breakfast and was working on a 5th. She looked up at him, looked at the paint-stained shirt, raised one eyebrow. "Don't," he said. "I didn't say anything. Your eyebrow said it. My eyebrow is an independent entity with its own opinions." She took a sip of coffee. "She took the green flannel, didn't she?" "She took all of them, Ro." Rowan's expression shifted from amused to something more careful. "All of them. Every shirt I own, plus 2 jackets, a sweater, and the wool blanket from the foot of our bed." He poured himself a coffee, the motion automatic. "Marcus is tracking it on a spreadsheet." "Of course he is." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Des, you know what nesting means." "I know what nesting means. Do you?" "Because you're standing in my kitchen wearing a shirt that smells like a hardware store, and you look more annoyed than concerned." That landed. It landed because she was right, and because Rowan had always been better than him at seeing the thing behind the thing. Nesting wasn't a quirk. It wasn't a funny relationship story. For an Omega, it was a deep, instinctive drive to create safety. And the fact that B was building her safety entirely out of his scent meant that she didn't feel safe anywhere else. But he was annoyed. He was annoyed because he'd been losing clothes for 6 weeks and hadn't said anything. Because saying something felt like poking a bruise. And because the longer he didn't say anything, the bigger the bruise got. And now he was standing in a paint-stained shirt, and he had a council meeting, and he was irritated with himself for being irritated with her, which made him more irritated, which was a loop he couldn't seem to exit. "Our mate is nesting," Apex observed, with the serene wisdom of someone who had never once had to navigate a complicated emotion. "This is beautiful. She is making a home out of us." "She's making a home out of my wardrobe," Desmond said under his breath. "Same thing," Apex insisted. It was not the same thing. Or maybe it was. That was the problem. He needed to clear his head. He told Marcus to push the council meeting by an hour. Marcus's expression suggested this was the professional equivalent of a war crime, but he complied. Desmond walked out the back door, past the garden where the pack grew tomatoes and herbs, and an inexplicable amount of kale that no one remembered planting, across the backfield where Nate and Ellis were still roughhousey in wolf form. Ellis had Nate pinned by the scruff and was shaking him like a chew toy. Nate, 3 years older and supposedly more mature, was making a noise like a squeaky tennis ball. Neither of them noticed their alpha walk past, which was either a sign of deep comfort in their territory or a sign that their situational awareness needed serious work. Desmond chose to believe the former. He stripped at the edge of the woods, folding his terrible shirt and setting it on a rock. The shift came easy, the way it always did when he needed it. Bones cracking and reforming, muscles stretching into their other shape, the brief, sharp pain of it already fading by the time his paws hit the dirt. He was a large black wolf, heavy in the shoulders, built for endurance rather than speed. The forest opened up around him in a rush of scent and sound. Damp earth, pine needles, the distant trickle of the creek. A rabbit 200 yards to the east that wasn't worth the effort. He ran, not fast, not with purpose. Just ran the way wolves needed to, the way he'd been neglecting for weeks because there was always a meeting, always a decision, always something that needed the man and not the animal. The ground was soft under his paws. The air was cold and clean. His thoughts, so knotted in human form, loosened into something simpler. Instinct, territory, a steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Somewhere in the middle of the run, he passed through a patch of wild chamomile, and the scent hit him so hard he stumbled. Bee. It smelled like bee. And just like that, the peace was gone, replaced by the ache of a problem he didn't know how to solve. He slowed, then stopped, standing in a clearing with the morning light filtering through the canopy, breathing in the ghost of her scent and feeling the distance between them like a physical thing. He shifted back, the cold air raising gooseflesh on his bare skin. He sat on a fallen log, bare-skinned and human, and no closer to an answer than when he'd started. The run had done what runs always did. Burned off the surface tension, but the thing underneath was still there, waiting. He dressed and walked back to the house. He had a council meeting to run, and a mate he didn't know how to reach. Beatrice was in the nest. She was always in the nest now, or near it, or thinking. It had started as a small thing, a single shirt tucked under her pillow, a secret so minor it barely registered as one. Now it filled the entire floor of the guest room closet at the end of the upstairs hall, a room she'd claimed quietly, without asking, the way she did everything, by making herself so small that no one noticed until it was already done. Her wolf, who was neither small nor quiet, had opinions about this. "Oh, we're doing the guilt thing again. Riveting. Let me get comfortable." She delivered her internal commentary with the bored confidence of someone who had never been uncertain about a single thing in her life. Where B was cautious, Vixen was blunt. Where B apologized, Vixen rolled her eyes so hard you could practically hear it. B adjusted the Henley, tucking it more securely against the wall of the closet, where it formed part of the nest's soft barrier. The fabric was worn to nothing, the cuffs fraying, and it smelled so powerfully of Desmond, pine, wood smoke, the clean musk underneath it was just him, that she could close her eyes and almost believe he was holding her. Almost. Not quite. Almost was the best she could do. "You know what would work better than almost?" Vixen said. "The actual man. He's downstairs. He has arms. They work." "It's not the same," B whispered. "It's literally the same. It's the same scent, attached to the same person, who, and I cannot stress this enough, would be thrilled to hold you. He'd probably write a poem about it. A bad poem, with too many adjectives." But B couldn't explain it, not even to her own wolf. The nest wasn't about Desmond's arms, though she loved his arms. It was about having something that couldn't leave. A shirt didn't wake up one morning and decide you were too much trouble. A flannel didn't need the room for its own pups. A sweater didn't look at you with kind, tired eyes and say, "You'll find your people, sweetheart." She'd grown up packless. That word, packless, sounded clinical, like a medical term, something you'd read in a textbook. It didn't capture what it actually was. What it actually was. 15 years of sleeping in places that belonged to other people. 15 years of keeping her things in a bag she could carry. 15 years of learning, through repetition and pain, that home was a temporary state, that comfort was borrowed, that the moment you started to feel safe was the moment you needed to start planning your exit. Her parents had been omega healers, gentle people who'd chosen independence over pack life. They'd been killed by rogues, and she was 7. She remembered her mother's hands, always warm. She remembered the sound of her father singing off-key while he cooked. She remembered the morning after, when the hands and the singing were gone, and the world became a series of rooms she passed through without leaving a mark. Desmond's shirt had been the first thing she'd ever wanted to keep. She hadn't meant to take it. He'd left it draped over the back of the chair in the kitchen months ago, before the bond was declared, back when he was still courting her with a clumsy, earnest intensity that she found both terrifying and irresistible. He'd brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He'd made her tea every morning, getting the order wrong for 3 weeks straight before Rowan finally told him she took honey, not sugar. He'd once walked into a door frame because she'd smiled at him across the kitchen. She picked up the shirt to move it. That was all, but the scent had hit her. Pine and leather, and something warm and steady that her wolf recognized before her brain caught up, and her hand had closed on the fabric, and she had not let go. That night she'd slept with it, pressed to her face, and for the first time in 15 years, the silence in her chest had felt like peace instead of emptiness. "Finally," Vixen had said, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years for their human to catch up. Now to the rest of his wardrobe. B had not done the rest of his wardrobe, not immediately. Phase 1 had been 1 shirt. Phase 2 had been 3. Phase 3 had been an escalation that B couldn't seem to control, a tide of instinct that pulled her under every time she tried to resist it. The nest grew. It demanded new materials, specific textures, precise arrangements. It was not a pile, it was an architecture. Each garment placed with the care of a mason laying stones, the whole thing curving inward like a shell, like a den, like the kind of place a wolf would crawl into and never leave. She knew it was too much. She knew, logically, clinically, that taking her alpha's entire wardrobe was not a normal expression of pair bonding. She knew Marcus had noticed. She knew Rowan had noticed. She was fairly certain the entire pack had noticed, because wolf senses made secrecy almost impossible, and because Desmond had been wearing increasingly terrible shirts for the past month and